Russia has a Black Sea problem, and for once, it is not exploding on Telegram in 480p with dramatic music and 3 different watermark logos fighting for custody of the frame. It is quieter than that. Much quieter. It is Turkey, sitting on the door, listening under the floorboards, and slowly making the whole sea feel smaller. That is what makes this dangerous for Moscow. Turkey does not need to go full Hollywood and start throwing destroyers around like it is auditioning for Top Gun Bosphorus Edition. Ankara is playing a meaner game than that. It is building pressure in layers. Down below, its new Reis-class submarines bring longer underwater endurance and far better stealth than the older boats. Up above, Turkish surveillance in the Black Sea has expanded again. At the choke points, Turkey still controls the straits under Montreux, which means naval access is not just about who has ships. It is about who gets permission to move them. And the country holding that gate is not Greece, which must be deeply upsetting for at least 6 retired admirals in Athens right now. Russia is used to threats it can see. A missile battery can be mapped, a ship can be tracked, a foreign aid package can be counted, complained about, and turned into another speech about Western aggression. Submarines do not work like that. A submarine changes your behavior long before it fires anything. The moment a commander knows there may be a quiet boat somewhere below him, every route gets uglier, every patrol gets tenser, and every escort plan starts looking too small. In a confined sea like the Black Sea, that uncertainty spreads fast, and Turkey is not building this pressure from scratch. For years, Ankara has treated the Black Sea less like a side quest and more like a room that can catch fire, while the rest of Europe is arguing over who misplaced the extinguisher. In January 2026, Turkish officials again framed Black Sea security as a strategic priority. That wording matters. Countries do not use language like that unless they want everybody in the room to understand one thing very clearly. This space is not being left on autopilot. Turkey intends to shape it. Now here is where the submarine piece gets serious. Turkey's undersea fleet was already one of the most consequential in the region because diesel-electric boats are nasty in tight waters. They are smaller, they are quiet, and in the kind of cluttered coastal sonar messy environment you get in the Black Sea, they can make life deeply annoying for anyone on the surface. But the arrival of the Reis-class changes the texture of that threat. The first boat, TCG Piri Reis, entered service in August 2024. The second, TCG Huzareis, was delivered in late November 2025 and publicly highlighted again in early January 2026 reporting. These boats use air-independent propulsion, which means they can stay submerged longer without snorkeling and spend more time doing the thing submarines are paid to do best: remain a rumor until it is too late. And that matters more in the Black Sea than people realize. This is not the Pacific. This is not some giant open ocean chessboard where fleets can stretch their legs and pose for recruitment posters. The Black Sea is constrained. Traffic patterns are tighter. Geography keeps pushing everyone back toward predictable lanes. Ports matter more. Choke points matter more. Shore-based surveillance matters more. That means a good submarine commander does not need an enormous arena. He needs a stressed opponent, a useful patch of water, and the patience to let paranoia do half the work for him. That is the part Russia has to hate. Because Turkey is not presenting itself as some wild-eyed crusader looking to ram the region into a direct NATO-Russia collision. Quite the opposite. Ankara still keeps channels open to Moscow. It still positions itself as a mediator. Turkish officials reiterated this again in March 2026, when Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan told Lavrov that Turkey remained ready to host another round of Russia-Ukraine talks. So from Russia's point of view, the country tightening the sea is also the country that can still smile across the table and offer diplomacy. That makes Turkey harder to dismiss and harder to openly confront. And while that diplomatic balancing act gets the headlines, the practical military layer keeps expanding in the background. In late March 2026, Turkey said it had detected 275 suspicious objects in the Black Sea since the war began. Among them were mines, kamikaze UAVs, and kamikaze unmanned surface vessels. Turkish reporting said 29 identified threats have been neutralized, and Ankara also described a wider surveillance push involving naval units, maritime patrol aircraft, helicopters, and UAV sorties. That is not symbolic activity. That is a country building a constant picture of the water and everything weird moving through it. And once you combine that surveillance picture with submarines, the game changes again. Because now the submarine is not just a lone hunter drifting through a dark sea. It becomes part of a wider system. Patrol aircraft watch, drones extend the eyes, surface ships manage presence, mine countermeasure units clean and classify hazards. The undersea fleet adds the one thing nobody wants to deal with on top of all that: invisible lethal pressure. Russia does not just have to think about what Turkey can see. It has to think about what Turkey can quietly place in the water once it has seen enough. And this is where the Bosphorus becomes the real villain in Russia's day. Because even if Turkey did not have a single submarine, it would still matter massively in this theater thanks to the Turkish Straits and the Montreux Convention. Turkey's foreign ministry lays out the restrictions clearly. Non-literal warships face notification rules, tonnage caps, and a 21-day stay limit in the Black Sea. The aggregate tonnage for non-literal states is capped as well. That means the naval balance in the Black Sea is not a free-for-all. It is regulated by a legal regime that gives Turkey enormous leverage over who enters, how long they stay, and under what conditions. That legal leverage got even sharper after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Once the war began, Turkey invoked Montreux in a way that effectively shut the door to warships of the belligerent parties passing through the straits, except in very narrow circumstances. So while people obsess over missiles and sanctions, Ankara has been sitting on one of the most important strategic pressure valves in the entire region. Russia can still operate in the Black Sea, obviously, but it cannot treat reinforcement and movement through the straits as some frictionless naval conveyor belt. Turkey made sure of that. That is why this story is bigger than submarines. The submarines are the sharp part. The straits are the heavy part. The surveillance network is the persistent part. The diplomacy is the confusing part. Put it together and Turkey starts to look less like a country merely involved in Black Sea security and more like the state quietly deciding how much oxygen the theater gets. Russia can still move. Russia can still threaten. Russia can still posture. But the room no longer feels fully Russian, and that alone is a strategic loss. And the worst part for Moscow is this: Turkey does not need a dramatic naval showdown to make Russia feel any of this. It only needs Russian planners waking up every morning knowing that somewhere between the Bosphorus, the Western Black Sea, and the invisible layer below the surface, Ankara has become the one country they cannot ignore, cannot easily bully, and cannot fully predict. That is when a submarine stops being a platform. That is when it becomes a shadow. And Turkey's shadow in the Black Sea is getting bigger. The really nasty part of Turkey's position is that it turns the sea into a contaminated operating environment. Because once a navy starts worrying about drifting mines, kamikaze surface drones, aerial surveillance, choke point law, and submarines that may or may not be there, the sea stops feeling like maneuver space and starts feeling like paperwork with the risk of death attached. That is where Turkey is strongest right now. Ankara is not trying to cosplay as some Mediterranean Poseidon. It is building a system that turns every Russian movement into a question mark. With those 275 identified threats I mentioned earlier, the Turkish picture of the sea is getting denser, not looser. That matters because sea power in the Black Sea is no longer just about combat power. It is about confidence. And confidence is exactly what gets shredded when nobody can tell whether the next strange radar contact is harmless drift, a mine, a drone boat, or the first sign that someone has already been watching you for hours. That is where the submarine enters like a tax audit from below. A Turkish submarine does not need to go hunting for some giant Trafalgar moment. In a sea this cramped, the real weapon is uncertainty. If Russian commanders have to assume that one of Turkey's quieter boats could be sitting near a route, listening near an approach, or shadowing from a position they cannot confirm, then Russian surface operations slow down on their own. Routes need more caution. Escorts get stretched. Timing gets uglier. Nerves get shorter. And because Turkey's new Reis-class boats bring air-independent propulsion, that pressure becomes harder to shake. A boat that stays down longer is a boat that keeps the rumor alive longer. That is the part casual viewers miss. The submarine is not dangerous only when it attacks. It is dangerous when it forces the other guy to act as if an attack is always one bad decision away. You guys may know this feeling perfectly. It is like hearing a weird knocking sound in your car engine and immediately turning the radio off, even though the radio has absolutely nothing to do with the problem. You are not solving anything. You are just becoming spiritually available for bad news. That is a Russian commander in a sea where Turkey's undersea presence is growing. And Turkey has paired that pressure with something even more powerful than stealth: rules. That sounds boring, which is exactly why it is so effective. But Moscow is now dealing with Turkey sitting on the faucet, controlling the legal access and the physical flow of the theater at the same time. That means Russia is not just dealing with Turkish submarines somewhere in the water. And when one country influences both the underwater threat picture and the access rules above it, that country starts shaping the theater without needing to posture like a superpower every 5 minutes on state television. This is where the pressure becomes political as much as military, because Ankara can look at Moscow and say very calmly that it wants regional stability. Then it can look at Europe and say Black Sea security is a strategic priority. Then it can keep talking to both sides while steadily expanding surveillance and mine response at sea. Russia cannot easily portray that as open Turkish aggression, because Turkey is still careful, still procedural, still wrapped in the language of security management. But from a Russian planning perspective, the result is the same. The operating space gets narrower while the diplomatic room to complain gets smaller. And the mine warfare piece matters more than people think, because mines do not care about your propaganda. A drifting mine does not stop and ask whether a ship is Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish, commercial, or carrying some very nervous insurance paperwork. It turns the sea into a liability zone. That is why Turkey's leadership in Black Sea mine countermeasure efforts with Romania and Bulgaria matter so much. Mine warfare sounds technical until you realize it decides whether ports feel usable, whether shipping lanes feel survivable, and whether navies can move without first wondering if the next few nautical miles are about to become a live demonstration. Turkey is not just watching the sea. It is trying to clean, classify, and control it. And the country that controls maritime safety starts controlling maritime tempo. That hits Russia in a very specific way, because Russia used to treat the Black Sea like a space where presence itself created authority. Now presence creates exposure. A ship that moves can be watched. A route that gets used can be mined, monitored, or anticipated. A fleet that wants freedom now has to think about drones, coastal strike threats, intelligence collection, navigation risk, and Turkey's gatekeeping role all at once. Add submarines to that, and suddenly the Black Sea stops feeling like an extension of Russian power and starts feeling like a region where too many people have a say. Which, to be fair, is Greece's worst nightmare. Not because Greece is in the Black Sea, obviously, just because somewhere in Athens, somebody always finds a way to be offended when Turkey looks competent at sea. And that is why Turkey is such an uncomfortable actor for Moscow. If this were a more openly hostile NATO state trying to dominate the Black Sea, Russia could default to its usual script: escalation, threats, accusations, grand historical nonsense delivered by a man standing in front of a flag the size of a shopping mall. Turkey ruins that script. Turkey is inside NATO, but not obediently theatrical about it. Turkey supports Ukraine, but still talks to Russia. Turkey blocks certain naval movements under an international convention, but does so through law, not chest thumping. Turkey expands surveillance, runs patrols, leads mine security efforts, modernizes its submarines, and still presents itself as the adult in the room. That combination is infuriating if you are Moscow, because it means Turkey is not cornering Russia with drama. It is cornering Russia with control. And once a state starts controlling the legal access, the maritime picture, the mine response, and the undersea ambiguity in the same theater, it does not need to announce dominance. Everybody can already feel it. And this is where Turkey becomes a bigger problem for Russia than most people realize. Because this may not end with Ankara simply watching the Black Sea, it may end with Ankara helping manage it. Reporting in 2026 has pointed to Turkey as a likely lead player in any future Black Sea naval security arrangement tied to Ukraine's security guarantees, while Turkish officials have kept stressing that Black Sea security is a strategic priority. That matters because it suggests Turkey is not just reacting to chaos anymore. It is positioning itself to shape the rules after the shooting slows down. Now think about what that means from Moscow's side. Think about the weight of that. A NATO member that still talks to Russia, controls the Straits, leads the regional mine security effort, and operates a submarine force that is getting quieter in the exact waters where Russia is most exposed. This modernization isn't a future plan anymore. It's an active patrol. That is why Russia feels this even when nothing dramatic happens. No missile strike, no viral sinking, no huge speech, just a sea that keeps becoming less comfortable. Turkey can watch more of it, clean more of it, regulate more of it, and threaten more of it from below. And because Ankara is doing all of that while staying publicly measured, Russia does not get the easy propaganda win of painting Turkey as some reckless lunatic. It is harder to rage against a country that keeps acting like the only adult left in the meeting. That is the real ending here. Turkey's submarine shadow in the Black Sea is growing, yes, but the shadow is only half the story. The scarier part for Russia is that Turkey is no longer just another navy in the region. It is becoming the state that can decide who moves, who watches, who clears the danger, and who has to live with the feeling that something may already be below them. And once that happens, the Black Sea is no longer a Russian comfort zone. It becomes a Turkish-managed headache, a very deep one.